7 red flags most men ignore right before it costs them everything. Not everything, like your life ends tomorrow. Everything like your peace gets chipped away so slowly you don't notice until you're a different person. Everything like your confidence gets quieter. Your standards get lower. Your nervous system starts living on alert, and one day you look in the mirror and realize you're not even mad at her anymore. You're mad at yourself. Because the signs were there early. You saw them, you felt them, you just talked yourself out of them. And that's what this video's about. Not the obvious red flags every man can spot. Not cheating, not violence, not some dramatic scene. I'm talking about the subtle patterns most men excuse because they're attracted, lonely, hopeful, or addicted to the idea that if they love right, she'll become safe. These red flags don't scream. They whisper. They show up as little moments that feel not worth leaving over. And that's why they win. Because by the time they feel worth leaving over, you're already attached, already invested, already making compromises you never planned to make. If you've ever ignored a small sign and then paid for it later, like the video because this one is meant to save you time you can't get back. Subscribe if you want more love delusion breakdowns that don't romanticize dysfunction. And if you've ever stayed because you thought you could talk it out, comment "I ignored it" so other men know they're not the only ones who learned the hard way. Let's go straight into the first red flag. The first red flag is disrespect disguised as just joking. It starts small. A little comment, a little jab. Something she says in front of other people. Something she says with a smile. And because you don't want to look insecure, you laugh it off. You tell yourself, it's not that serious. You tell yourself, she's just playful. But your body knows. You feel the sting. You feel the slight humiliation. You feel that tiny dip in your status. And you ignore it. That's where it begins. Because the problem is not the joke. The problem is the permission. When a woman learns she can cut you lightly and you'll stay, she learns where the line is. And once she learns where the line is, she slowly moves it. Here's what that looks like in real life. You're out somewhere and you say something normal, and she replies with, "You always think you're right, huh?" and laughs. Or you're with friends and she says, "He's sensitive, don't mind him," like you're a child. Or she teases you in a way that isn't playful, it's contempt. And you can feel the contempt. It's that little "I'm above you" energy. A lot of men only recognize disrespect when it's loud, but disrespect starts as tone before it becomes behavior. If she gets comfortable speaking to you with contempt early, you're not building a relationship. You're building a dynamic where she can chip away at you and you'll keep showing up. Now let me drop you into a moment. He's sitting in the passenger seat while she drives, music low. The mood is good. He makes a comment, something light. She smirks and says, "That's why you're not in charge of anything." She laughs, like it's nothing. He laughs too, but the laugh is forced. He feels it in his chest, like a small collapse. Later that night, he tells himself he's overthinking. He tells himself he should be able to take a joke. He tells himself she's just sassy. 2 months later, jokes become insults. Insults become public embarrassment. Public embarrassment becomes him staying quiet to avoid getting humiliated again. That's the cost. Now, let me talk directly to you. If you have to constantly swallow disrespect to keep the vibe good, you're not in love. You're managing. The second red flag is emotional punishment. This one ruins men because it trains them to be anxious. Emotional punishment looks like silent treatment, coldness, withdrawal. Suddenly acting distant when she doesn't get what she wants. Suddenly not feeling like talking when you set a boundary. Suddenly switching energy when you don't comply. And the reason it's dangerous is because it creates conditioning. Your brain starts learning that displeasing her equals suffering. So you start living to avoid displeasing her. That's how men become controlled without ever being told what to do. Here's the scene. You say no to something. Calmly, respectfully, She doesn't argue. She doesn't communicate. She just changes. Short replies. No affection. Dry tone. Like you committed a crime. And now you're sitting there trying to fix it, trying to get her back, trying to restore the warmth. That's not love. That's training. Now, another moment drop. Your phone lights up. You text her, "What's wrong?" No reply. Hours pass. You send another message. "Did I do something?" Still nothing. Then later she texts, "I'm fine." But she's not fine. She's punishing you. And because you want peace, you apologize. You chase. You overcompensate. And now she knows. Withdrawal works. This is one of the biggest red flags because it doesn't look abusive at first. It looks like she's in her feelings. It looks like she just needs space. Number space is communicated. Punishment is vague. Space sounds like, "I'm overwhelmed. I'll talk later." Punishment sounds like silence that makes you feel guilty. If you've ever found yourself apologizing just to make the tension stop, like the video, because this is how men lose their spine slowly. The third red flag is inconsistency that keeps you hooked. A lot of men confuse inconsistency with complexity. They think she's deep. They think she's guarded. They think she's been hurt. They think she just needs patience. But inconsistency is usually a sign of emotional instability or lack of genuine interest, and it creates addiction. Because intermittent reinforcement is the strongest form of conditioning. Sometimes she's warm, sometimes she's distant, sometimes she's affectionate, sometimes she's cold, sometimes she texts all day, sometimes she disappears. And you start trying to earn the warm version of her. That's how men get trapped. You're not dating her anymore. You're chasing a feeling. And the worst part is you'll call it love. Let's drop into it. It's late. He's staring at his phone. Earlier that day she was sweet, calling him baby, saying she missed him. Now she hasn't responded in 6 hours. He tells himself she's busy, but he knows she's on her phone because she posted. And now he's in that place, the place where you don't know if you should say something or act cool. You don't know if you should check in or disappear. You're not being yourself. You're strategizing. That's not a relationship. That's a casino. Men ignore this red flag because when she's good, she's really good. And that's the trap. Now, the fourth red flag is constant male orbiters, and she acts naive about it. This one is tricky because women will call you insecure for noticing it. They'll say, "They're just friends." They'll say, "You're controlling." They'll say, "I can't have male friends." This isn't about male friends. This is about boundaries and attention. If she keeps men around who want her and she enjoys the attention and she refuses to establish boundaries, you're dating a woman who needs validation more than she needs peace. And if she needs that much validation, your relationship will always be competing with her appetite. Here's how it shows up early. She's always got a guy friend texting her late. She says things like, "He's like a brother, but he calls her beautiful." She says, "He would never, but he's clearly waiting." And when you bring it up, she doesn't reassure you with clarity. She deflects. She turns it into you being insecure. She makes you feel wrong for noticing. That is a red flag. Because if she respected you, she would respect the relationship's boundaries without needing you to beg. Now I'm going to stop here because we've hit 4, and I want each one to sink in. The next 3 are the ones men ignore the most because they don't look like red flags. They look like personality. They look like confidence. They look like independence, but they're not. They're warnings. In the next chapter, we're going to go deeper into the remaining red flags and why they always lead to the same outcome if you keep tolerating them. Chapter 2. The red flags that do the most damage are rarely dramatic. They don't announce themselves as danger. They blend in as personality traits, as "that's just how she is," as things you think you can live with until you can't. The fifth red flag is entitlement to your effort without reciprocity. This is the one that drains men quietly. It looks like you always being the one who plans, you always being the one who checks in, you always being the one who fixes tension. you always being the one who pays emotionally, mentally, sometimes financially. And she receives it as normal, not appreciative, not grateful, just accustomed. Early on, men excuse this because they think leadership means carrying the weight. They think masculinity means providing energy. They think if they give enough, the relationship will stabilize. But what actually happens is the opposite. When effort flows one direction, value perception follows it. The one who gives more starts to be worth less. Not morally, psychologically. Let me drop you into a moment. You cancel something important to see her. She doesn't acknowledge it. You drive across town. She's late. No apology. You bring up something that bothered you. She listens, nods, and then does it again. And you keep showing up. At some point, you feel tired. Not physically, existentially, like you're carrying something that isn't being carried back. And instead of asking why she's not investing, you ask yourself what you're doing wrong. That's how this red flag works. It flips accountability inward. Men ignore this because they think relationships are built through sacrifice. They are. But sacrifice without mutuality is self-erasure. If she's comfortable receiving everything without giving anything back, she's not building a relationship with you. She's consuming one. The sixth red flag is lack of accountability followed by defensiveness. This one tells you everything you need to know about her future behavior. Everyone messes up. Everyone makes mistakes. That's not the red flag. The red flag is how someone responds when confronted gently and reasonably. If every attempt to address an issue turns into her getting defensive, flipping it back on you, bringing up unrelated things, crying to avoid responsibility, or painting herself as the victim, you're dealing with someone who cannot grow inside a relationship. Because growth requires ownership. Here's how it plays out. You say something simple. When you did that, it didn't sit right with me. She doesn't say, I hear you. She says, so now I'm the bad guy. She says, you always do this. She says, you're too sensitive. She says, why are you attacking me? And suddenly, you're comforting her. Now your issue is gone, and hers is center stage. This trains you to stay quiet, to bottle things up, to avoid bringing up concerns because you know it will turn into drama. That's not peace. That's suppression. Men ignore this red flag because they don't want to be that guy who upsets her. They don't want to be labeled controlling or insensitive. So they swallow their needs. Years later, they're resentful and exhausted. The seventh red flag is future talk without present behavior. This one is subtle and incredibly dangerous. She talks about the future, about marriage, about kids, about building something together. She paints pictures. She uses words like one day and eventually. But in the present, she's inconsistent. She avoids commitment. She avoids responsibility. She avoids effort. Men hear the future talk and assume progress is happening. It's not. Future talk without present action is a pacifier. It keeps you invested without requiring her to change. Let me drop you into it. She says things like, you're exactly the kind of man I want to end up with, but she won't show up on time. She says, I can really see us building something, but she won't respect boundaries. She says, I'm not ready right now, but I don't want to lose you. And you stay, because hope is powerful. Men ignore this red flag because they're dating potential instead of reality. They fall in love with who she could be if things align, if timing is right, if she heals, if circumstances change. But relationships aren't built on who someone could be. They're built on who someone is when nothing is ideal. Now let me talk directly to you. If you're constantly waiting for the relationship to turn a corner, you already know something is wrong. Healthy relationships don't require you to wait for alignment. They feel aligned early. Now, here's the part most men don't want to accept. All 7 of these red flags have one thing in common. They require you to betray yourself to maintain the relationship. You laugh when you want to speak up. You apologize when you didn't do anything wrong. You wait when you should leave. You hope when you should observe. And every time you do that, you teach her how much you'll tolerate. Now let's pause. If at least one of these red flags hit close to home, like the video, because awareness is the first step out of the pattern. Share it with a man who keeps asking why his relationships always feel draining. And comment if you've ever ignored something early that came back bigger later. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about why men stay after seeing these red flags, the psychological traps that keep you invested, and why walking away early feels harder than staying even when staying hurts. Chapter 3. You don't stay because you don't see the red flags. You stay because something inside you starts negotiating with them. That's the part most men don't want to admit. The danger isn't ignorance, it's rationalization. It's the quiet mental gymnastics that turn clear warning signs into context, timing, or something you can work through. This is where men get trapped, not by her behavior, by their own explanations for it. It usually starts with empathy. You tell yourself she's been hurt before. You tell yourself she didn't mean it like that. You tell yourself she's just stressed. You tell yourself you don't want to overreact. Empathy becomes the excuse. And once empathy starts overriding self-respect, you stop protecting yourself. Let's drop into a moment without introducing anyone. You're replaying a conversation in your head. Something she said didn't sit right. You felt it immediately. That tightness in your chest, that quiet, "this isn't okay" voice. But instead of listening to it, you start editing reality. You remember how affectionate she was earlier. You remember the good days. You remember the chemistry. So you downgrade the red flag. You tell yourself, it's not that bad. That sentence has ended more men than they'll ever admit, because not that bad is how patterns begin. Here's the psychological trap. Men are wired to endure, to push through, to fix, to stabilize. Those traits make men successful in work, in hardship, in responsibility. But in relationships with unstable dynamics, those same traits become liabilities. You don't walk away when something feels off. You try harder. And the relationship teaches you that trying harder is the price of staying. Now, let me shift perspective for a second and talk directly to you. If you've ever felt like leaving would make you weak, dramatic, or the bad guy, that belief didn't come from nowhere. Men are socially conditioned to tolerate emotional discomfort in relationships and call it maturity. You're told walking away is avoidance. You're told setting boundaries is control. You're told staying is strength. So when red flags appear, your instinct isn't to exit. It's to endure. And that's where the damage compounds. Let me show you how this looks from the outside. From a third-person view, it's almost painful to watch. A man sees the signs early. He even mentions them once, lightly. The response is deflection or emotion. He backs off. He doesn't want to cause tension. He doesn't want to lose something good. Weeks go by. The behavior repeats. He says nothing this time. Months go by. The behavior escalates. Now he's confused, attached, and emotionally invested. By the time he finally considers leaving, it feels impossible. Not because the relationship is good, because his identity is now tied to surviving it. This is why men stay after red flags. They don't want to admit they misjudged someone. They don't want to feel like they wasted time. They don't want to restart. They don't want to be alone. So they tolerate. And tolerance rewires you. Your nervous system adjusts to tension. Your standards shrink. Your reactions soften until chaos feels normal. That's the most dangerous phase, because once chaos feels normal, peace feels suspicious. Now, here's another angle most men miss. Red flags don't just predict how she'll treat you. They predict how you'll start treating yourself. You stop speaking up. You stop trusting your instincts. You stop asserting needs, not all at once, gradually. And that's why men wake up years later angry, bitter, and confused about how they got there. They didn't fall off a cliff. They walked down a slope. It's not a fight. It's not dramatic. You're about to say something that matters to you, something small, something honest. And then you pause. You think, is this worth it? That pause is the beginning of self-abandonment. Men don't lose themselves in explosive relationships. They lose themselves in quiet ones where they keep choosing peace over truth. Women don't respect men who abandon themselves, not consciously, instinctively. Because if you won't protect your own boundaries, she can't feel safe leaning on them. That's the paradox. Men stay to keep the relationship, but staying the wrong way is what kills it. Now let's talk about why walking away early feels so hard, even when it's clearly the right move. Because walking away forces you to accept reality without a story that makes you feel better. If you leave early, you don't get to say, "I tried everything." You don't get to say, "I did my best." You don't get to feel morally superior. You just have to say, "This isn't for me." And that's uncomfortable for men who are used to earning outcomes through effort. Walking away early feels like quitting. But it's not quitting, it's selecting. The men who protect themselves aren't less patient. They're more precise. They don't wait for disrespect to become unbearable. They don't wait for exhaustion. They don't wait for resentment. They leave at the first pattern. Not because they're heartless, because they're disciplined. Now let me say something that might sting. If you need things to get really bad before you leave, you're not strong. You're scared. Scared of being wrong and scared of being alone, scared of starting over. And fear is what keeps men in damaging situations far longer than love ever does. If this chapter is making you uncomfortable, that's good. Like the video because discomfort is how delusion breaks. Share it with a man who keeps explaining away signs he already understands. And comment if you've ever realized you stayed longer than you should have, not because you didn't know, but because you were afraid to act on what you knew. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about what actually happens when a man walks away early, why it feels wrong at first but right later, and why the men who exit fast don't regret it. Chapter 4. Walking away early feels wrong before it feels right. That's the part nobody prepares you for. There's no applause, no closure speech, no dramatic confirmation that you made the correct decision. Most of the time, you walk away into silence. And silence is where doubt tries to move in. You replay moments, you remember the good parts, you question whether you were too harsh, too quick, too rigid. You wonder if you should have just waited a little longer, explained a little better, tried one more time. That internal tug is why most men don't leave when they should. Because leaving early doesn't give you emotional validation, it gives you space. And space takes time to reveal why it mattered. Let's drop straight into it. You're driving home alone. No fight, no blow up, just a quiet decision. You didn't yell, you didn't accuse, you didn't beg. You simply stepped away from something that felt off. And now your mind is trying to bargain. You think about how intense the chemistry was. You think about how she said she wasn't like the others. You think about how rare it felt. And for a moment, you feel empty. That emptiness is what keeps men stuck. They confuse the absence of stimulation with regret. But emptiness is not regret, it's withdrawal. You didn't lose a healthy bond. You detached from a pattern. And patterns fight to stay alive. Here's the truth men don't hear enough. Walking away early hurts less, but it confuses more. Staying too long hurts more, but it makes sense. Because pain at least feels like proof that you cared. Men often choose the pain that feels meaningful over the discomfort that feels ambiguous. That's a mistake. Let's talk about what actually happens after a man walks away early, once the noise dies down. First, your nervous system settles. You don't realize how tense you were until the tension is gone. You stop checking your phone. You stop bracing for mood shifts. You stop replaying conversations in your head. Your body exits survival mode. That alone is a signal most men ignore. Peace feels boring when you've been living in chaos. Second, your clarity returns. The fog lifts. You start seeing the red flags not as isolated incidents, but as a pattern you escaped before it trapped you. You remember the moments you felt small, the times you hesitated to speak, the little compromises that would have grown into habits. And that's when relief shows up. Not joy, relief. relief that you didn't have to become someone else to make it work. Now, let's flip the perspective for a moment. From the outside, people often misunderstand men who leave early. They'll say things like, "You didn't give it a real chance," or "Nobody's perfect," or "You're too picky." What they don't see is that the man wasn't leaving because of imperfection. He was leaving because of direction. He saw where it was going. Most people don't leave relationships when they're bad. They leave when they finally accept they're not getting better. Men who leave early aren't impatient, they're perceptive. Let me shift into another angle without announcing it. She notices you're gone. Not immediately. At first, she assumes you'll come back, that you'll text, that you'll check in, that you'll fold like before. And when you don't, something interesting happens. The dynamic stops feeding her. Whether she was intentionally doing it or not, the pattern relied on your tolerance, on your explanations, on your willingness to stay uncomfortable. When that disappears, she has to face the situation without the buffer you provided. Sometimes that leads to reflection, sometimes it leads to defensiveness, sometimes it leads to nothing at all. But here's the key point. None of that is your responsibility anymore. Walking away early is powerful not because it changes her, but because it returns you to yourself. Now let me talk directly to you again. If you've ever felt like you needed things to get really bad before you could justify leaving, that's conditioning. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need a villain. You don't need betrayal. You don't need a dramatic ending. You need alignment. And misalignment is reason enough. This is where men often ask, "But what if I was wrong?" That question reveals something important. You're not afraid of losing her. You're afraid of misjudging reality. And that fear keeps men frozen. But here's the truth. If you were wrong, walking away would have felt chaotic. If you were wrong, your body would have resisted the calm. If you were wrong, peace wouldn't feel like relief. Your body knows. That quiet exhale after leaving is information. Now let's talk about regret, because men worry they'll regret leaving too soon. Real regret doesn't sound like doubt. It sounds like self-betrayal. Regret sounds like, "I knew this wasn't right, but I stayed anyway." Regret sounds like, "I ignored my instincts and paid for it." Regret sounds like, "I became someone I don't respect." Men rarely regret leaving early. They regret staying late. That's the pattern, over and over. Now let's zoom out one more time. The men who walk away early don't become cynical. They become selective. They don't stop believing in connection. They stop believing in forcing it. They don't close their hearts. They protect them. And the irony is this. Men who leave early end up more open long-term because they haven't exhausted themselves on the wrong situations. They haven't numbed themselves. They haven't built resentment. They haven't learned to tolerate chaos. They've learned to trust their read. That's the difference. If this chapter feels like it's naming something you felt but couldn't articulate, like the video, because that awareness changes how you move next time. Share it with someone who thinks leaving early is weakness. And comment if you've ever noticed that the relationships you left quickly bothered you less than the ones you stayed in too long. In the final chapter, we're going to bring everything together. We'll talk about how men who internalize these red flags move differently forever, why they stop getting trapped in the same dynamics, and how walking away early becomes less painful and more automatic with time. Chapter 5. There's a moment that changes how men move forever, and it doesn't feel heroic. It feels quiet, ordinary, almost boring. It's the moment you stop needing things to make sense emotionally before you act. You don't wait for closure. You don't wait for confirmation. You don't wait for proof that you're right. You trust the pattern and you go. That's when red flags lose their power. Because red flags only work on men who still believe endurance is virtue in relationships. Once you understand that attraction, respect, and peace are not things you negotiate into existence, you stop getting trapped in the same stories with different faces. Let's drop you into that shift. You notice something early, your chest tightens, your energy dips, you hesitate to speak freely. And instead of explaining it away, you recognize it. not as drama, not as insecurity, as information. And you don't confront it, you don't announce it, and you don't try to fix it. You adjust your behavior. You stop leaning in. You stop prioritizing. You stop investing. And you watch what happens. Healthy dynamics respond to distance with clarity. Unhealthy ones respond with confusion, manipulation, or nothing at all. Either way, you get your answer fast. That's the point most men miss. Walking away early isn't about being harsh, it's about being efficient. The men who stop paying the everything price are the men who no longer need chaos to justify leaving. They don't need disrespect to become extreme. They don't need betrayal. They don't need proof that would convince a jury. They just need misalignment. That's enough. Let me shift perspective without announcing it. He doesn't argue anymore. He doesn't try to be understood by people who don't listen. He doesn't stay in conversations that feel like erosion. Not because he's cold, because he's done bleeding slowly. And something interesting happens when a man moves like this. He stops attracting chaos, not because he became perfect, because chaos can't attach to someone who exits early. The red flags still appear. They always will. Different people, same patterns. But now they don't escalate. They don't spiral. They don't get time to grow roots. They get noticed, then dismissed. And that's it. Let's be honest about something most men won't say out loud. The goal isn't to avoid pain completely. The goal is to avoid unnecessary pain. Pain that teaches nothing new. Pain that repeats the same lesson you already learned. Most men don't lose everything because they didn't know better. They lose everything because they knew and stayed anyway. They stayed because leaving felt cruel. They stayed because leaving felt premature. They stayed because they didn't want to feel like they gave up. But staying too long isn't strength. It's fear wearing patience as a costume. Here's the real difference between the men who pay the price and the men who don't. The men who pay the price wait for red flags to turn into red alarms. The men who don't leave when the pattern reveals itself. They don't need intensity to validate intuition. They don't need pain to justify action. They trust their read. And that trust compounds. The next time a red flag appears, they don't debate it. The next time something feels off, they don't argue with themselves. The next time peace drops, they don't rationalize it away. They move, calmly, quietly, without resentment. And that's why it never costs them everything, because everything is only lost when you stay long enough to give it away piece by piece. Your confidence, your edge, your sense of self, your time, those aren't taken from you. They're surrendered slowly in relationships you should have left early. If you recognized yourself in any of these red flags, that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. Most men are taught to override instinct in the name of loyalty, patience, or growth. But growth doesn't come from tolerating what breaks you. It comes from choosing differently the next time. Like the video if you want fewer lessons learned the hard way. Share it with someone who keeps confusing love with endurance. Subscribe if you want more love delusion breakdowns that replace hope with clarity. And remember this, red flags don't ruin men. Ignoring them does. The moment you stop negotiating with what your body already knows is the moment it stops costing you everything.